When it comes to taking on China, nobody plays hardball like Donald Trump. While past presidents would send strongly worded letters, Trump sent tariffs, and now he's doubling down. From trade to tech to national security, Donald Trump isn't just talking tough, he's trumping China. So here is Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt on Trump's stance.
Look, the president has made his position on China quite clear, although I do have an additional statement that he just shared with me in the Oval Office. The ball is in China's court. China needs to make a deal with us. We don't have to make a deal with them. There's no difference between China and any other country except they are much larger. And China wants what we have, what every country wants, what we have, the American consumer. Or to put it another way, they need our money.
So what's the strategy this time? Scott McKay is the publisher of the Hayride, and he wrote a piece about this for the American Spectator, where he's a contributing editor. So he joins us now. So Scott, thanks so much for the time, because this is the story that everybody is talking about, right? It's America, it's China, it's the trade war. So how is Trump's trade policy actually going to help America beat China?
Well, what's obvious is for a very long time, China has been sort of the center of our supply chain. And that has had a whole lot of, frankly, very negative, although maybe unsung consequences. We're making all of our drugs in China. We're depending on China for a lot of things we need in the Defense Department and with its procurement. And they're in a position to supply a good bit of our, especially retail trade and in tech and everything else that you've mentioned. And it's a hostile country that doesn't share our values. We saw, we go back years. Maybe a great example of this is, do you remember back in the fall of 2019 when Daryl Morey, who was the general manager of the Houston Rockets, made some comments about how China was swallowing Hong Kong. And the next thing you know, China was buffaloing the NBA and threatening its billion-dollar deals with television in China. And, here we thought we were going to be controlling China to a large extent by doing business with them. We were going to turn these people into Jeffersonian Democrats. And what was very clear at that point, and has been made more clear since, is that they were having an outsized influence on our culture rather than the other way around. And so Trump comes in office and he looks at a $300 billion annual trade deficit with the Chinese, recognizes there's leverage in that, and is beginning to demand a lot better deal for American producers that would like to export to China, while at the same time cutting back on the amount of influence that China is exercising on us. And it's very long overdue. There may be some pain associated with it, but at the end of the day, it's hard to see how China wins this trade war.
Scott, I love pointing out the Hollywood example. The media example is great. It's one of the best moments almost in irony in recent American history when Hollywood would censor its movies gladly for the Chinese market. But yeah. Very gladly. They're very happy to do so. But let's talk about, this is such an important point, because a lot of times people are talking about tariffs, they're talking about China, but they're not focusing on why China is bad. And you do this in your article, even comparing it to the Soviet Union. It made me think, it's okay to call everyone you don't like a Nazi these days, but no one compares anyone to the old communist regimes that killed millions of people. And we act as if China is some, obviously it's not the same as it was then, but as it's some different modern entity. Talk to us a little bit more about why we should be so concerned.
Well, let's remember, this is fundamentally the same regime that looked at the fall of the Soviet Union and decided it happened because the Russians were a bunch of wimps, right? You had the fall of the Berlin Wall in Eastern Europe, and in China you had Tiananmen Square, right? Like these guys, these are the evil communists that we weren't really all that concerned about in the 80s. But they've carried on the Cold War in a little different sort of framework that, as it turns out, is a lot more effective than Soviet communism ever really was. Their record on human rights kind of makes the Russians look like the wimps that they thought they were. And, look, give them credit. They're very smart. They've decided we're going to become an old school mercantilist economic force. We're going to do nothing but export goods and essentially destroy everybody else's manufacturing base because we're going to pay our people nothing. We're going to do absolutely nothing in terms of protecting the environment. They're building a coal-fired power plant on practically every street corner in China right now. And the place is utterly polluted in a way that the Andrew Carnegies and Vanderbilts and Rockefellers of the world would look at and go, hey, you guys need to take better care of the environment. And they're doing this so that they can turn out the lowest quality, lowest cost products, and don't really care that much about quality either, to undercut the rest of the world. And they've done a really good job of it. I mean, I look at a perfect example, and I had another piece at the American Spectator that showed up yesterday about Temu, which is this fast fashion consumer app that the Chinese have debuted a couple of years back. Basically, the app is spyware. It steals all your data, and it pushes extremely low-cost merchandise made in sweatshop factories that use something that we would term as slave labor, essentially, to undercut prices. And they've been so effective that Temu is making billions of dollars. Meanwhile, you had a fast fashion brick and mortar chain here in America, Forever 21, that is going out of business, has filed Chapter 11. They used to be the middleman between those Chinese manufacturers and the American consumer. And the Temus, and I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Shine, I think is the other Chinese merchandise app.
Don't worry, I know all of them.
Basically said, okay, well, there you go. Threw Forever 21 under the bus. Yeah. Right? They were the middleman. They said, well, we don't need you anymore. We're just going to market straight to the American people. And so here are all these thousands of American jobs that are going away, maybe in an industry that also goes away as a result of these tariffs. I liken this to the old parable about the frog and the scorpion, right? The scorpion convinces the frog to carry him across the river, and then midway through, he stings the frog, and as they're both dying, the frog says, hey, what was that all about? Like, you've killed both of us. And the scorpion's like, well, it's my nature, right? Like, this is what I do. Well, Temu and Shine are the scorpion, Forever 21 is the frog, and it turns out that Trump is the river. And so, this is a status quo that really couldn't sustain, and Trump is making sure that it doesn't sustain. And so you're going to see a bunch of these things change in a way that may be painful in the short term, but over the long haul, I think it's probably better for everybody. Maybe even the Chinese people, because at the end of the day, this business model of export, 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 while you impoverish your own people and make it so that they can't become consumers, maybe that model doesn't work and the Chinese people get a better deal from their own government at the end of the day.
So, Scott, let's talk about the American consumer then in the short term and in the long term, because I am guilty of all those previous companies that you've said. I love like something off for Temu for $1, right? But now what's going to happen for the American consumers in particular, that short-term outlook and the long-term outlook for them?
Well, you may want to wait an extra 6 months before you buy a new iPhone. Right? Like, I mean, there are a lot of consumer products that may become slightly scarce as we're resourcing them from elsewhere. Within a year or 2 or 3, I think a lot of our supply chain gets pulled out of China and it gets brought to not necessarily America, although I think that's a goal, is to insource as much of manufacturing to our shores as possible. A great example of this is NVIDIA is now going to be making a whole lot of chips in Arizona, rather than having it be done in China and elsewhere across the Pacific. Like, that's going to create a lot of American jobs. As Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, has noted, a lot of factory construction is coming. You're going to see a lot of robotic manufacturing that we're going to use, which will create jobs because you need people to service those robots. And so you're going to see a great deal of technical innovation in manufacturing here on our shores, which I think is nothing but a good thing. But yeah, in the short run, we're going to have to take a more productive approach to our economy rather than consumerist approach. And that may mean not as many fashion halls. It may mean not, going out and buying the newest thing because it's not going to be as cheap as it was. But then when a lot of this manufacturing is either insourced here or it moves from China to Mexico, or it moves from China to Brazil or someplace else, I think it starts to stabilize. And in the meantime, you are going to see, particularly with the 130 countries that are now negotiating with the White House to do new trade agreements with us, you're going to see our ability to market our goods to the rest of the world on a level that we've lost over the last 2 to 3 decades. With some countries that are nominally our allies, but we've had really not the greatest trade relationship with. I think a lot of that's going to change, and that's going to help the American economy as well. So maybe things don't cost what they cost now, but your purchasing power becomes greater because our economy is better.
So, Scott, last question we have time for. You hear a lot on the right, especially. There's a lot of concern about this, right? I mean, this violates the free trade absolutism of the previous decades that the Republican Party has essentially adopted as its own. And obviously, there's a lot of people of all kinds who are freaking out. And what is your message to those people, especially those people on the right who are concerned?
Well, okay, so what you're really concerned about right now, and a lot of people are, is that the market has dropped as associated with this. Actually, last I looked at the Dow, it's a little better today. But generally speaking, the advice that I'd give you don't lose money in the market unless you sell at the bottom of the dip, right? So buy the dip rather than sell the dip. So there's that. But the other part of it is this. We have talked the talk on free trade for a very long time. What we have not done is walk the walk, meaning we have not demanded that the people that we give very, very good treatment to in terms of international trade, we've not demanded reciprocity from these guys. And so particularly in Canada's case, you've got a whole bunch of non-tariff trade barriers, and then you have lots of tariffs that kind of sit just atop the volumes where we're actually starting to really export a certain kind of good. All of a sudden, there's 250% tariffs. We need to do a better job of getting these countries to do free trade with us. And that has not been the case through several presidential administrations. Whether this works as well as Trump hopes or whether it, is a partial gain, at least he's willing to fight this fight on behalf of American producers. And nobody has done that for a while. So this might be bumpy. My guess is it's going to be a mixed bag for a while. But at the end of the day, if you get a better deal to export your goods to other countries around the world, it's probably a fight worth having. And I would guess, at least in the medium term, we're going to see this as something that needed to be done a while ago.